Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you all with us. Last night it seemed that the crisis we face with climate change took center stage. And while the DNC still opposes a climate debate between Democratic primary candidates and challengers, the activists are having none of that and have forced the conversation, and CNN took up the challenge, where one by one over 7 hours, each Democratic candidate for president for 40 minutes spoke, answers questions, laid out their ideas and plans. And the Real News Climate Bureau team, Donna Nora and Steve Horn, watched the entire thing and join us to explore the most important takeaways from last night's conversations that took place on television over those 7 hours. And good to see you both. Good to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
So
Good to be here.
Let's begin with Naomi Klein's tweet about the significance of this event. And what she said really, I think, grabbed me. Let's take a look at what she said. So Naomi Klein, after watching all of this, said that, gotta say that just seeing the words, quote unquote, climate crisis in red on screen is a victory for our movements. Finally, the starting premise is correct, and none of it would be happening without the work of millions. And that's kind of how I started this conversation off. But Donna, let me let you grab that first. I mean, I think it really was a move by the movements in this country that forced this debate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think many of us watching would maybe have preferred a 2-hour climate debate, which is what activists were pushing for. Selfishly, because I'm pretty tired right now. But I will say, I agree with Naomi Klein that it was pretty incredible and shouldn't be overlooked that, CNN really did, take this up. And for the most part, I think that the framing actually, did in some ways speak to the level of the crisis that we face. Although, there were still, I think, some questions that I think played a little bit into, or a lot of it into Republican talking points, like we always sort of see. But, it was pretty incredible to see such an in-depth discussion about the climate crisis on a network like CNN, and to see so many, great folks get to ask questions.
One of the things, Steve, that the positive aspect of this, I suppose, is that each candidate actually had 40 minutes. So plans were really outlined in ways we might not have heard before. But again, I think that what Donna was saying and what Naomi Klein said, that without the power of the movement over these years, especially in these last couple of years, pushing for this might have never happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, I was saying this when the movement, broadly speaking, a lot of the movement was upset that there hasn't been, there maybe won't be a climate debate, an officially sanctioned one by the DNC. But I think that, having each person speak this long about where they stand on policy, it kind of gets away from those gotcha moments and trying to back someone into a corner. And they really have to be in the limelight for a long period of time. And there was really no time limit on how long they could speak to those issues. So I thought that was an important element. The other thing I'll say is just looking at the history of CNN and cable news. I mean, looking even a couple decades ago, or maybe even 1 decade ago, they were having climate deniers on panels and stuff to counterbalance talking about climate change. So this is a kind of a pretty landmark moment that I'm not sure if they'll continue to have those kind of climate deniers or if there is an actual sea change. But yeah, for example, Pat Michaels, who's a longtime climate denier for the Cato Institute, was a regular guest to speak on as a representative of climate denial on CNN for a long period of time.
So in this part of our discussion, let's kind of get to the heart of what this part of what these people actually said and how they were really different in how they want to phase out using fossil fuels and how do we get there. So let's briefly talk a bit about, Donna, how what happened in this town hall and how fast the transition might be, and the money part we'll get to a little bit later, but I think this is kind of a very critical element here.
I think a lot of the candidates were adhering to this idea that we need to phase out of fossil fuels by 2050, but there was a lot of disagreement about how we get there. I mean, two bigger sort of issues that came up were what to do about fracking and what to do about nuclear power. So, some candidates came out saying that they would support fracking bans. Warren, I think for the first time, said that. Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, and others came out saying that, they wouldn't support a fracking ban. Amy Klobuchar, I think kind of funnily said that she would not support a fracking ban, but would go over every fracking permit in the United States, which seems like, good luck with that, girl. But, so I think that there are some pretty different ideas of how to actually take this on.
Well, let me ask you, I was trying to pull those pieces out. I was not like the two of you. I didn't stay up all night watching each and every minute of this. Maybe I should admit that to everybody, but I didn't. But I did watch a lot of it, and I kind of read a lot about it this morning very early. And it seemed to me part of this debate has to do with how you frame the climate debate for the larger American audience, and seeing that some of these Democratic candidates, especially Biden and Klobuchar and Booker and Yang to an extent as well, it's about how you become a quote unquote realist as you address this.
Right.
How do we actually get there? People look at fracking and say, well, fracking, yeah, we have to stop it maybe, but we have to get there. So talk a bit about that kind of debate. I mean, this is a debate between kind of appealing to a broader audience, realism versus necessity. So how do you parse that out?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested to hear from Steve on this too, but I think it kind of depends who you ask. I think, you know, if you have never been impacted by fracking and all you know about it is what you hear on the news, maybe you believe that natural gas is a transitional fuel, as Amy Klobuchar and others call it. But people who have been directly impacted by, you know, the sort of public health effects of fracking, I don't think would ever say that, you know, that they would like to see that in the transition to renewables. So I guess it sort of depends on who you're asking. I mean, also we should say like this debate, or this town hall rather, comes after so little climate coverage in previous elections and in the previous debates. And I think that, you know, viewers aren't super primed to really get into some of the more nitty-gritty elements of these kinds of plans. So really, I think in some sense, you know, these folks are more talking to people who already are familiar with the issues on things like, you know, fracking or nuclear waste and things like that. And then where they're really going to be appealing to a broader audience is by talking about, you know, how to pay for things, how many jobs are going to be created and things like that.
Steve, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I think like just talking, you know, it didn't really come up. I don't think that there was any nuanced discussion of what does that mean to be a transition fuel from a climate perspective. Like, so basically, you know, fracking is methane gas, and methane is a greenhouse gas that in its first 20 years of the atmosphere is like anywhere from a range of 50 to 100 times, depending on the study, more potent than carbon dioxide. So, I mean, a lot of scientists, climate scientists, scholars say that actually it's a lot worse than maybe even coal, especially how it's being built out. And there's so many areas where there could be leakage, like in pipelines or at different facilities. So that didn't really come up, but that's like a key thing undergirding a claim that natural gas is a transition fuel. Is the scientific reality has proven like a lot more complex than that, as an example.
And part of that debate in this, and it also had to do with nuclear power, which really became, I mean, it became a significant part of the debate. It is a significant part of the debate for most Americans as well. Mm-hmm. So how did this play out?
Yeah, I think, so Andrew Yang and Cory Booker were the two people who really envisioned this sort of new kind of nuclear reactor, a new age of nuclear reactors. And Bernie Sanders came out and said that he didn't think that nuclear had any place in this transition at all. I mean, I'm certainly not the expert on this, and I think there are very intelligent people who believe that nuclear has no place in the transition, and very intelligent people who believe that it certainly does, and that it can be done more safely. But again, I don't think that there was very much discussion about, you know, there was a lot of, well, nuclear waste can be very dangerous, but there wasn't so much discussion of, you know, anything that could be done to mitigate some of those dangers, or even why nuclear waste is so dangerous and what harms it actually poses.
So a question, so talk about what you two walked away with in terms of, and what America walks away with in terms of how do we get there? I mean, that was a big push by Bernie Sanders, a big push by Warren and a couple of few others, Kamala Harris. How do we get there? So what did you walk away from? What did they tell us? What do we know?
Well, so, I mean, 8 out of the 10 said that the way that you get there to a transition, or, you know, phasing out of fossil fuels, is a carbon tax or a carbon fee. I'm not really, a couple said carbon fee, and they didn't really explain if that's the same thing as a carbon tax. So like Kamala Harris was one who said that she supports a fee, and so was Julian Castro, as opposed to a carbon tax, which was the other half dozen. And then Bernie Sanders sort of has a multivariate way of raising $16.3 trillion for his phase out. And then I think that the one, kind of the old guard, of the group was Beto O'Rourke, who said that there should be a cap and trade system, which will put a fee on it, and then that money will be used to phase it out. So kind of like a parallel to the California system that exists now.
And one really interesting thing, just to add to that, that Sanders mentioned that didn't get as much coverage from others was the need to phase out of funding the military, because the Pentagon is the largest industrial emitter of fossil fuels, or rather the largest consumer of fossil fuels, the largest industrial emitter of greenhouse gases. And I mean, I think that that's something that I was really excited to hear said on a network like CNN. Biden, on the other hand, talked quite a bit about how to sort of green the military and talked about how the military could play an important role in fighting the climate crisis. And I think increasingly, some of the activists who've been pushing for a climate debate and other kinds of actions are having none of that.
One quick note on that.
Sure.
I'm not sure if Sanders said that it was more in the context of the expense of how much we spend on the military. I'm not sure if he got into how dirty or how polluting that the Pentagon is. But I also to that green thing that you're talking about, not only was it Biden, also Buttigieg went into that same thing. And I think he even kind of, talked up the benevolence of the Pentagon almost as like a progressive actor within the U.S. political system.
Sure, yeah. The because here is, I guess, my reading on Sanders' proposal. But I mean, other more progressive, I guess, candidates have also talked about the need to green the military. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, sort of infamously in sort of more left climate circles, also spoke about the need to make the military more sustainable and work with our brothers and sisters in the military to fight the climate crisis. So pretty interesting to see so many different perspectives there.
And I think coming out of that is how you pay for all this and what the cost will be and how do we get there. And so we're interested in that. We know America's interested in that. And we're going to end this section of our panel right now with our two guests, Steve Horn and Donna Noor from the Climate Bureau here at The Real News. And we'll have another segment, which I hope you will watch, which will hear what the candidates said about how you pay for this. Where's the money come from? How do we get there? We'll find out. And I'm Mark Steiner here with The Real News Network. Check the next one out so you can find out as well.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.